Hello and welcome. This evening, we are pleased to welcome to the Westminster Town Hall Forum our opening musical guest, Minneapolis-based singer-songwriter Sarah Morris. Sarah's endearingly honest songs encourage audiences to pull away from the big picture and get caught up in the minutiae of our everyday. Her voice granting us permission to escape into stories at once familiar and uniquely her own. Sarah is a graduate of Lawrence University Conservatory of Music and spent the first years of her career in Nashville. Inclined toward the intimacy of live performance, Sarah invites us into her songs to count and celebrate the glorious details of our messy, magical, everyday lives. Let us welcome Sarah Morris.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You can't depend on it showing up at some given time. So don't set your watch by it, I'm saying, and you'll do okay. You'll be fine, yeah, you might have to wait a bit. But if you don't mind, somehow it will taste sweet when it finally arrives. Love, like the poets and the sages, I can never get enough of I've scanned the wisdom of the ages. I have searched the stars above and mostly found some variation of, yeah, it's the good stuff, the good stuff, the good stuff, love. Might be around the corner or a little further down the line. Up here as a tap, tap on your shoulder, so soft you're slow to recognize. Or like so many songs have witnessed, suddenly from a clear blue sky, you're standing face to face with a wild and wonderful surprise. Love, love, like the poets and the sages, I can never get enough. Love, I've scanned the wisdom of the ages. I have searched the stars above and mostly found some variation of, yeah, it's the good stuff, the good stuff, the good stuff, love. It will ask you to fall. Say yes, yes to the tumbling down, turning inside and out, and yes when it ends, and you're shattered in pieces, and you can't stop the bleeding, yes, even then. And some someday when it knocks on your door again. Love, love, like the poets and the sages, I can never get enough of love. I've scanned the wisdom of the ages, I have searched the stars above, and mostly found some variation of yes, it's the good stuff, the good stuff, the good stuff, love. Thank you so much. I am Sarah Morris. I'm thrilled to be here looking at your beautiful faces in this beautiful place as you get ready to hear a rich conversation. It's hard to know what to sing when you're opening up for such an event. That's a song. I do a lot of my songwriting based on word prompts. I belong to a group of humans dedicated to writing a song a week, come heck or high water. And the word that inspired that song was sporadic. And I thought about, things feel sporadic, they feel chaotic, they feel a lot of things, and what did I want to say to my kiddos as a grounding? Where do you find your grounding in the times of chaos? And I fell down on love. I fall down on it all the time. I choose it anytime I can, and that's mostly what I'm going to sing about. So. There, things didn't work out like you wanted. Once again, your heart is haunted by the ghost of a dream that might have been. We've all been there, holding a bad hand from a raw deal. Certain no one knows how lost you feel. If they did, wouldn't somebody be looking for you? Oh, our best laid plans won't always come to fruition, or we'll find we cannot bear the true cost of admission. We grow dizzy from the constant stream of contradictions, so it only makes sense when we fall down. And then you get a bit of sweet to tame the sour, or you stumble on a single match in the middle of your darkest hour. Oh, an answered prayer rarely looks like a wish come true. There, I've made that mistake too. Now what? I think you pull yourself together. Trust me, in the end it's better if you're the one to take the strings and tie the bow. Oh, our best laid plans won't always come to fruition, or we'll find we cannot bear the true cost of admission. We grow dizzy from the constant stream of contradictions, so I'm never surprised when we fall down. And then you get a bit of sweet to tame the sour, or you stumble on a single match in the middle of your darkest hour. Oh, unanswered prayer really looks like a wish come true. There, I've made that mistake too. I've sworn it was the last time, when I knew I'd just begun. I've promised to stick around, even as I turn to run. I've kept my head beneath the sand while longing for the sun. You are not the only one. You're not the only one. And then you get a bit of sweet to tame the sour, or you stumble on a single match in the middle of your darkest hour. Oh, unanswered prayer really looks like a wish come true. There, I made that mistake too. There, I made that mistake too. Thank you. I've got a song that I can't stop singing. I got a few of them, but I wrote this one mostly for my mom a few years back. She seemed to be in need of a reminder of her inherent awesomeness. She'd maybe been forgetting that. And after I wrote that for my mom, I kind of realized that I maybe also wrote it for my best friend who needed to hear it. I maybe wrote it because sometimes I need to be reminded. I'm awesome too. But I sing it now for you because my guess is that occasionally you also need to be reminded that you are wonderful. So in case you've forgotten, let me sing it at your face. Champagne on a Wednesday, why not give me a reason? Well, okay then, sit back and watch this cork go flying. It does so. You're laughing, holding the glasses, they overflow. We're high before the foam reaches our lips. I can't stop smiling. Oh, this is all I really wanted. Everything I need. Look at you, letting go. Yeah, if you could see what I see, you are effervescent, light as air. You're bright as the moon. Ooh, the full kind on a clear night, a glittery hot air balloon. You are effervescent, incandescent, the sparkle of a billion stars. I've never known anything as brilliant as you are, as you you do me a favor? Put on something that makes you feel like dancing. We'll find ourselves an empty parking lot. Turn up the volume on this old boombox that's been collecting dust since we were 17. I mean, this is all I really wanted. Everything I need. Shrug that worry from your shoulders. Travel back in time with me. You are effervescent, light as air. You're bright as the moon. Ooh, the full kind on a clear night. A glittery hot air balloon. You are effervescent, incandescent, the sparkle of a billion stars. I've never known anything as brilliant as you are, as you are. I've heard the stories you tell yourself. No wonder you're not sleeping well. Let me paint you something new, something closer to the truth that you are, 'cause you are effervescent, light as air. You're bright as the moon. Ooh, the full kind on a clear night. A glittery hot air balloon. You are effervescent, incandescent, the sparkle of a billion stars. I've never known anything as brilliant as you are, as you are. 'Cause you are, you are, you are, you are, you are, you are. Thank you. Go sit at that piano. I want to thank Keith for taking such good care of me and you on sound. I only play piano when I show up at a venue and there's a stunningly gorgeous grand piano just sitting there. My parents very kindly sent me to lessons for years and years, and then as soon as I started writing songs, piano to me was always sheet music, and I better read, what some beautiful composer has written. And so when I went to go start writing, I couldn't find my own voice there because I wanted to be Bach, and guess what? I'm not. But then eventually I did start finding some of my own little melodies at the piano, and even though it pretty much scares the pants right off of me to do this, I do it anyways. Look up, my love, look up tonight. Look up, my love, they are shining bright. Weren't we just this morning lamenting? It has been so long, what if they've gone away? Look up, my love, it's nice and clear. Look up, my love, the clouds disappear. And so go all those worries, those fears. The heavy gray is here to stay. Look up, my love, it was worth the wait. The stars are back, the stars are back, and I for one refuse to take them for granted. The stars are back, the stars are back. cutting through the deep black. Ah, the stars are back. Look up, my love, as I am for you. Look up, my love, they are constant and true. No matter what may cover them up for a moment, a season or two. Count your lucky ones, they'll come again soon. The stars are back, the stars are back, and I for one refuse to take them for granted. The stars are back, the stars are back. I'm over the moon, completely enchanted, light cutting through the deep black. Ah, the stars are back. Do you see it? I see it. There's a curve, there's a line. Do you see it? I see it. Together in brilliant design. Running through infinite space, beyond my conception of time. It would be too much to face if it weren't for the weight of your fingers laced into mine. The stars are back, the stars are back, and I for one refuse to take them for granted. The stars are back, the stars are back. I am over the moon, completely enchanted, light cutting through the deep black. Ah, the stars are back. The stars are back. The stars are back. Thank you so much. All right. This is a song about uncertainty, which I think is everything. Between here and there, between now and then, there's a wide plain in a deep canyon. There are oceans vast, and there are mountains high, there are forests thick with ancient pines, and it's a lot to see through, and it's a lot to look past. It's a lot to take in, and it's a lot to ask, and it's almost maybe too much to hold. I know. Between right and wrong, between weak and strong, there are infinite ways it's only for sure. And the story's the same wherever you go. Between a won't and will, between storm and still, there is howling fear and quiet brilliance. There is darkest night and morning's bright from gold and blue, intertwined, and it's almost blinding, and it's hard to hear. And the questions keep coming and the answers right there, and it's almost maybe too much to hold. I know. Does it make it any better? Does it make it any worse? Finding brand new words for these age-old hurts. Any certainty we muster, it's only for sure. And the story's the same wherever you go. And it's a lot to see through, and it's a lot to look past. It's a lot to take in, it's a lot to ask. It's almost maybe too much to hold. And I know that you're tired. I wanna let go, and the best I can offer, so you don't have to do this alone. I have to wind up here, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for letting me sing to you. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you, Sarah Morris. It's been a joy to have you leading us in music this evening. Thank you. Hello, I'm Reverend Dr. Megan Gage Finn, and I serve here at Westminster as Senior Associate Pastor, and it is my privilege to welcome you this evening to the Westminster Town Hall Forum. Westminster has been the home to the Town Hall Forum since 1980. We are excited to celebrate our 45th year. We are grateful that you are here. Please take the time after the program to enjoy our spaces. Tour the art gallery, visit the library, and of course, meet in Westminster Hall for breads and spreads and continue the conversation. At this time, I would like to acknowledge and give thanks to our interim director of the Town Hall Forum, Erica Carter. Erica holds a Master's of Public Policy from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, and prior to joining us, she led global inclusion and social impact messaging at Ecolab. Where is it? There we go. There's it. She moves on me each forum, so yeah. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our media sponsors for today's program. MinnPost is a nonpartisan, nonprofit, reader-supported source of Minnesota news. Visit them online at minnpost.com. Thank you as well to Sahan Journal, celebrating more than 5 years of nonprofit journalism for and about Minnesota's immigrants and communities of color. Visit Sahan Journal, yes. Visit sahanjournal.com. And the Town Hall Forum is also pleased to partner today with our longtime friends, Minnesota Public Radio. And as a reminder, if you've not already, please do silence your cell phones. For nearly 45 years, the Westminster Town Hall Forum has invited speakers of conscience to address issues of the day from an ethical perspective. We invite you to visit our website, westminsterforum.org, to see a full list of our programs, past and present. And one last note before we begin. This is a critically important fundraising period for the Forum. Today's program and everything the Forum does is made possible by supporters like you. Individuals, donors are by far the largest source of funding for the Forum. In short, the Forum simply does not happen without you. So if you can, please do support the Forum. For those of you who are here in person, there are donation envelopes in your program, and if you're watching via the live stream, you can donate at westminsterforum.org/donate. Thank you. Tonight's forum is a special event in partnership with the University of Minnesota Law School and the Humphrey School's Center for the Study of Politics and Governance lecture series, the Mondale Dialogues, thought-provoking events that project the decency and fairness that guided the public life of Walter F. Mondale and the principles he fought for. In the second half of this evening's program, our guests will be taking questions from the audience. Those of you who are with us here in the sanctuary will find a blank question card in your program. Please use that card to record a question for our speaker. Ushers will collect them during the Q&A. If you're watching online, please submit your questions into the chat under the video at any point. We will also collect and present those as time allows. Tonight, we are pleased to welcome guest moderators, University of Minnesota professors Larry Jacobs and Alan Rozenshtein. Professor Larry Jacobs is the McKnight Presidential Chair, the Walter F. and Joan Mondale Chair for Political Studies, and founder and director of the Center for the Study of Politics and Governance at the University of Minnesota's Humphrey School of Public Affairs. Dr. Jacobs has published 17 books and edited volumes and more than 100 articles on elections and public opinion, legislative and presidential politics, and health policy. He's also published in mainstream outlets, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Star Tribune, and more. He is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Professor Alan Z. Rozenshtein joined the University of Minnesota Law School as a visiting professor in 2017. In 2019, he became an associate professor of law and earned tenure in 2024. He is the research director and a senior editor at Lawfare, a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, a term member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and a member of the Scholars Strategy Network. He previously served as an attorney advisor in the Office of Law and Policy in the National Security Division of the U.S. Department of Justice, where his work focused on operational, legal, and policy issues relating to cybersecurity and foreign intelligence. Before joining the Justice Department, Professor Rozenshtein clerked for Judge J. Harvey Wilkinson III of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. And while attending Harvard Law School, he was a Heyman Fellow, served as articles editor for the Harvard Law Review, and was a contributor to Lawfare. Please join me in welcoming Professors Jacobs and Rozenshtein.
Good evening, and thank you very much to Dr. Gage Finn and to everyone here at Westminster for partnering with us on tonight's event. My name is Alan Rozenshtein. I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota Law School, and I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's discussion on the fabric of our Constitution. Joining me this evening to co-moderate is my colleague, Professor Larry Jacobs. And it is my deep, deep pleasure to introduce our guest tonight, Jack Goldsmith. Jack is the learned Hand Professor of Law at Harvard University and a leading expert on presidential power, national security, and foreign relations. He is the author of many books, most recently After Trump, Reconstructing the Presidency, and he previously served as an Assistant Attorney General and head of the Office of Legal Counsel at the Department of Justice and as Special Counsel to the Department of Defense. A former clerk for Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy, Jack holds degrees from Yale, Oxford, and Washington and Lee, and has taught at the University of Chicago and the University of Virginia. And if I may be allowed a personal note, he was my law school professor and is thus responsible for most of what I've been able to achieve since then, for good or for ill. It is an honor and a privilege to share the stage with him. So let's get started. So you have been thinking and writing about what is often called the imperial presidency for, I think, more than 2 decades now. And I think it's a nice place to start our discussion off tonight. So what is the imperial presidency? How has it evolved through your professional life, and before, of course? And perhaps most importantly for tonight's discussion, how have the last few months changed your views about it, if at all?
Well, first of all, thank you, Alan, for that introduction. Thank you all for coming. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here. The imperial presidency was a phrase coined by Arthur Schlesinger Jr. in a book written in, I think it was 1973. And it was a book written just in the middle of Watergate and just as Vietnam was reaching its unhappy denouement. And it was a book in which Schlesinger, who had formerly been a champion of the presidency for decades and decades, it was a book in which he was basically looked at presidential history and he was extremely critical of it, mostly in the national security context, because he felt the presidency had grown too strong and not sufficiently accountable. And Schlesinger believed, as I believe, that the Constitution requires a strong president, but it requires a strong president under law and accountable to law and to Congress and to other institutions. And so the original version of the imperial presidency was the kind of the Nixon presidency, the Johnson presidency, the Vietnam presidency, the presidency that supervised all of the abuses that were coming out in this time about the intelligence community. And that was the original imperial presidency. And so we've lived through waves, and I have to say, in light of the criticisms of that book and basically the criticisms of the presidency, there were major reforms in the 1970s, reforms of the presidency that worked quite well for 50 or so years. So to make a long story short so we can get to the current president, so looking back and then looking forward, the office of the presidency created by Article 2 of the Constitution has always been very open-ended. And starting with George Washington, literally, presidents have been asserting power controversially. It started with Washington, and presidents have, over the course of 250 years, asserted power controversially. The imperial presidency of Schlesinger was a high point of this. This continued for the next 50 years. It happened in various ways. The administration in which I served, the George W. Bush administration, was super aggressive under Article 2 of the Constitution in the national security context, very controversially, as you'll remember. President Obama, I shouldn't say just President Obama, but presidents also began to assert unusual powers, sort of stretching their powers under statutes through executive orders to accomplish policy goals. And on a variety of dimensions, presidents in the, say, 20 years before President Trump, they were pushing the envelope on presidential power. And then we come to President Trump. And I'll just skip over the first term. Do you want me to just describe how I see this imperial presidency? Would that be a good place to go?
Very much so.
Okay. So I'm just going to skip over the first Trump presidency because that was just an amuse-bouche to what we're experiencing now. So there's been no presidency like this before, and not just in the obvious ways. And I'm going to talk about the extent to which law purports to constrain a presidency, because this is a very important idea. This might seem improbable, but the executive branch has 2 to 4 million people, depending on whether you include the military. A lot of people in it. And it does a lot of things, and it does a lot of things governed by law, by the Constitution, by statutes, by regulations, by norms. And most of the laws that govern the executive branch don't end up in court. It's governed within the executive branch. So it's hugely important that the executive branch be able to self-regulate itself by having lawyers throughout the executive branch who interpret the law and constrain the executive branch to ensure that it complies with the law. And there's every reason to be skeptical about this, but it actually has worked remarkably well. Not perfectly, but remarkably well. So one of the most important things that Donald Trump has done in this administration is to basically wipe out, in a way that I never thought possible, these internal legal constraints on the presidency. Not just norms, non-legal practices and understandings that you might have heard about a lot in the last 10 years, which he blew through in his first term and is blowing through now, but actual statutes and constitutional provisions. The executive branch has very self-consciously and brilliantly or deviously, depending on how you look at it, organized itself such that the internal constraints of law are no longer operating. The rule in the, and I am not someone prone to exaggeration, but the rule in the executive branch is the president's will governs, what the president wants will happen, and the lawyers basically need to get on board. So this is something really new and quite challenging in American history, because one very important constraint on the executive branch are these internal checks, and they're basically diminished. I'll just say 2 more things and then I'll be quiet. Another important constraint, hugely important traditionally, has been Congress. This constraint on this is the constraint that the framers were most committed to and who believed would be the biggest constraint on the president. This is obviously no longer the case. The framers thought that the Congress as an institution would have institutional loyalty vis-a-vis the other institution in the executive branch. They didn't contemplate the rise of parties, and now loyalty is run to parties rather than institutions. And I don't need to tell you, just read the newspaper, the Congress is placing 0 check on this president. There was actually a little bit of pushback on the tariff stuff for the first time, but on everything else, nothing. So this basically leaves the third institution of government, the courts, as really the only constraint on the president. And I'll just stop here because you may want to pursue it, but it's not an accident that the Trump administration has been viciously attacking courts, playing games in courts, threatening courts, and the like. Courts right now are the most important institution for constraining and keeping the presidency in check. And I'll just stop there.
Thank you very much, Professor Goldsmith. I want to see if we can help folks here. You read the newspaper, there are so many legal challenges against President Trump. It's approaching or maybe surpassed 200.
Yep.
It's a lot. And I guess the real help you could give us is, could you pick out 1 or 2 cases that are so extraordinary that, before Donald Trump, no judge, no competent lawyer would have considered it, that really exemplify the challenge and the threat that Donald Trump poses?
Well, there's so many, but sure, I'll pick out 1 or 2. So one obvious one is the executive order basically eliminating birthright citizenship and reinterpreting the 14th Amendment to eliminate birthright citizenship. I won't get into the complex legal arguments, but suffice it to say, even though there's some debate among law professors and the like, in my judgment, there's absolutely 0 basis for this One good piece of evidence for how weak this argument is that the executive branch, the Justice Department, the office in which I used to work, the Office of Legal Counsel, has a written opinion that basically says President Trump is wrong and that this issue is easy, and it's about a 40-year-old opinion. And on this point, it is just the president saying, I just want to change the constitutional understanding and attempting to act on it. Now, he's been stopped by court so far, and we're in the middle of that litigation, but that would be one example. Another example is one, I don't know how much it's been on the radar screen. I could go on, but I'll give you one more example. And it might not seem as important with all of this stuff. I mean, we could talk about the immigration cases, but it's these attack on law firms. Now, you might not think, people don't like lawyers, and you might not, big law is not always the most attractive set of institutions. But big law does a lot of important services in keeping the government accountable and in their pro bono services and the like in challenging the government. And the Trump administration has gone after big law with, and again, I will say either brilliant or devious, depending how you look on it, way with clearly illegal orders that have no chance of standing up in court because they so obviously violate the First Amendment and the Due Process Clause. But you've seen law firms caving and saying, in just the most extraordinary way, saying, we confess error, we did things wrong, even though they didn't do anything wrong. We will spend, for example, $100 million on a pro bono program to your liking, Mr. President. So that's extraordinary. But what's really devious about this is part of these orders say to the law firm clients that if you do business with these law firms, you can't do business with the government. It's like a secondary boycott. And the effect of this is that these clients don't want to do business with these law firms, even if these orders are completely illegal. And the effect of that is that these lawyers and these law firms don't want to bring cases to challenge the government in its illegal actions. That's, I think, the real goal here, is to keep any challengers to the president's legal program. It's part of it is retaliatory and punishment, but part of it is designed to create powerful disincentives for lawyers who, whatever you think in their other capacities, do really important work in bringing challenges to illegal government action. And that is what one of the main goals here is. And I'm afraid it will be at least partially successful.
Thank you, Professor Goldsmith. Let me follow that up with something I'm sure you've been thinking about. The phrase constitutional crisis. It's been around for decades and decades. I noticed it really kind of coming to greater prominence over the last quarter century.
Yep.
And the administration you were in for George W. Bush was one. It was just a common phrase. And then if you kind of switch aisles and you listen to the commentary, particularly among Republicans, you heard constitutional crisis with regards to much of what, or some of what Barack Obama was doing, and so forth. What does that phrase mean? And are we in a constitutional crisis?
So my candid answer is I'm not sure what the phrase means, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So we're in a bad situation. I don't want to deny that. I'm not sure that the phrase constitutional crisis is a useful analytical phrase for describing or analyzing the situation we're in. The idea of constitutional crisis, it's been a phrase that's been kicked around, especially, as you say, in the last quarter century. And it's basically an overused and exaggerated phrase in so many contexts, when one side accusing the other side of doing something deemed to be illegal or unprecedented or a challenge to the constitutional order, when in fact all administrations do things, take steps which are ambiguous or maybe aggressive under the law, but we have courts and Congress and other systems that in normal times keep these institutions in check. And frankly, this is kind of the way the system was supposed to work, with the institutions clashing with one another and checking one another. So my own view is that this phrase came to be used too often in the past. That's the first point. Second point is it's not precise. It doesn't have a strict definition. It doesn't tell us how we know when we're in it. It doesn't tell us what happens when we're in it. My own view is it's just kind of a phrase that captures anxiety about the state of the rule of law, which we clearly should have, but it doesn't provide measures for comparing different cases and telling us how bad the situation is. So for some of these reasons, it's not a phrase I like to use, in part because it's been so overused. So I'm not going to use it. I'm not going to assess whether we're in a constitutional crisis here. I guess I'll say a few things. There's no doubt in my mind that what we're experiencing now is the greatest challenge to the rule of law in my lifetime. I'm 62 years old. And by the rule of law, I mean the idea that the government operates under and is bound by law and is checked by law. I again want to emphasize that the executive branch is huge, and there are many lawsuits in every administration against an executive branch, and they're constantly being determined to be unlawful in court because they went too far or they were too aggressive. That's the normal process working. But what we have here and now is something much more ambitious, much more organized as a way of establishing institutions and attacking institutions to clear away all constraints of law on the executive. They have not succeeded yet. The main reason they have not succeeded is because of the courts. And it's a bad place. I probably have more confidence in our courts than a lot of people in this room. I actually have a lot of confidence in our federal courts. But the federal courts, they can't enforce their own decisions. And we can talk about whether Trump will comply with decisions if you like. And they basically have the power of reason and the power of the people backing them up and the power of the executive branch worrying if they don't comply that something terrible will happen, like something bad in Congress, don't count on it, markets going bad, etc. So we're in a very precarious situation, and we're deeply dependent on courts right now to keep the government under constraint, at least until Trump's political power decreases and his own party or other parties in Congress start to take steps against him. So that's my preferred way of describing the situation we're in.
Thank you, Professor Goldsmith. Professor Alan Rozenshtein.
So let's talk about the courts, because as you've now mentioned a couple of times, they are the main thing standing between the administration and some of its worst abuses. There are lots of things we could say about the courts. We could debate whether they're up to the challenge, whether they've been playing it straight, but I want to ask a different question. I want to put ourselves in the perspective of a judge who has to decide one of these cases. There's a concept in constitutional law called the presumption of regularity, and that's this idea that when courts are evaluating a government action, they assume that the government is acting properly, truthfully, in good faith. Now, that's a presumption. It can be rebutted if there's real evidence of the contrary. But it's a very important principle for a number of reasons. It makes sure that the work of the government isn't gummed up by people accusing the government of violating their rights constantly. But perhaps most importantly, it safeguards the courts from real conflict. Because as you just pointed out, the courts can say what they want, but they can't enforce their own rulings. So I'm curious, as you've been tracking these cases over the last few months, and even what we've seen in the last few days as some of these cases have begun to go up to the Supreme Court, what's your sense of how the courts are thinking about their relationship, and what do you think they should do when confronted with, let's say, some illegality that they're not sure that they can necessarily stop?
Right. Okay.
An easy question.
So the first thing I want to say is I urge you to go to a site called Lawfare, Lawfare, and read an outstanding article that Alan wrote on this very topic today or yesterday? Today, yep. Okay, I'm going to answer some of that, and if I don't answer all of it, come back. So this presumption of regularity is important because so much of, and we've been seeing this in a lot of these cases, courts really depend on the government being truthful and open with it in cases, in giving it honest and full information. And this is just one of many assumptions about the way our system works that has worked for a very long time by every administration I've known. And it's like so many other norms, it's kind of the glue that makes the system work, because if courts can't trust the truthfulness of the executive, it's very hard for them to reliably assess whether the executive is acting lawfully or not. So I would say on the first point I would make is that this administration, so let me say, they haven't yet, to my mind, defied a judicial decision. They've been playing lots of games with courts. They definitely, in the Venezuela case that deported those 300 Venezuelans, were doing their best to circumvent the court, to get those people out of the country before the court would act. But despite all the talk about defiance, I have not seen that yet. It may be coming. It wouldn't be the first time, but it hasn't happened yet. But that said, the executive branch has, in court, been so consistently either not candid or borderline dishonest or not prepared that the courts are having less and less confidence of their ability to know what's going on, and you can see the judges becoming growingly frustrated. This is a large problem for how courts adjudicate these cases. That's the first point. Second point is these judges are operating in the face of extraordinary threats by the president, by the president's administration, by the president's close allies. Now, there's been rising threats against judges of both parties, from both parties, going back a while now, and it has been a terrible trend, in my judgment, that we haven't done enough about before Trump, but it's reached a new stage now. So these judges are operating in a situation in which they're trying to be severely intimidated. So that's a second factor that's informing what they're doing. And then the third factor is, are my decisions going to be complied with? And your question to me is, how should the judges think about these things, these factors, when they're trying to resolve these cases? And my basic view, and I think this is what the courts have been doing, is the courts just have to play it straight. It is very important that the courts follow their rules and stick with their principles. Judge Boasberg, who's been the one that's received the most heat in regard to the Venezuelan deportation case, has been a master at this. He's kept us calm. He's been very methodical in dealing with all this stuff. And I just think the courts have to not break their own norms in responding to the Trump administration's norm breaking. They have to follow their rules as best they can. They have tools to sanction the executive branch if there's lying or if there's contempt. How effective these tools will be remains to be seen. But my basic view is they just have to proceed as they've always proceeded and play it straight.
Thank you very much, Professor Goldsmith. In July 2024, the Supreme Court ruled that presidents have absolute immunity for acts committed by presidents with regards to their official acts or constitutional duties that the core of the executive branch. At the time, the court's decision was, of course, aimed at the prosecution of citizen Trump. We're in a different situation now. Yeah. What is the consequence, in your view, of that immunity decision, July 2024, now that we're sitting here in April 2025?
Yep. Okay, so this is going to get a little legal nerdy, but I'll try not to be too legal nerdy. So when that decision came down, the focus was on what you just said. The Supreme Court has declared former President Trump immune from criminal prosecution in the scope of the opinion was uncertain, but in an array of cases. And that means that future presidents are going to not care about the law and act lawlessly and criminally. And at the time, I didn't think that was the right focus, and I definitely don't think that's the right focus now. And I'm not saying it won't have any impact, but there was a much more consequential part of the decision. Supporting that ruling about immunity, the Supreme Court, for reasons that still are mysterious to me, went on and on about the powers of the president, not his president's immunity, but the powers of the presidency, and the exclusive powers of the presidency, i.e., powers of the presidency that can't be touched by Congress or courts. And the court spoke especially unprecedentedly broadly about a president's power to remove officials and the scope of that power, and especially about the president's discretion over law enforcement, and about how the president had massive discretion over law enforcement. So I'm quite sure that I believe that Chief Justice Roberts wasn't thinking through how President Trump 2.0 would use those precedents. But those precedents about the scope of presidential power to fire, and especially how to enforce law, are, in my judgment, turbocharging what President Trump is doing. The Trump opinion gets cited in a lot of the cases. I know you're overwhelmed. Even if you read the newspapers, you're just overwhelmed with all the decisions, but I actually try to read these things and keep up with them. And this Trump decision, the briefs, the Trump decision is being cited over and over again as kind of a superpower that is enabling Trump to do a lot of the things he's doing. So I think that's a very important but unexpected result of that decision, is that it didn't just give the presidency a shield from prosecution, it gave the president new swords to do things in the executive branch that the other branches can't check. And that's its most dangerous aspect, in my opinion.
Thank you, Professor Goldsmith. Professor Alan Rozenshtein?
During the Obama administration, you wrote a really great book called Power and Constraint. And I don't just say it's great because I checked some of the footnotes, I believe, when I was your RA. And in that book, you argued that the growth of the presidency, the imperial presidency, was still substantially checked by a number of factors: Congress, the courts, the public, the media. Some of that has aged well, some of that perhaps has aged less well. I'm curious what parts of that argument you still think might be present in this current situation.
So I think you're being much too kind about that book. This book was written in a different era for a different problem. This book was written when President Obama came into office after President Bush, and to people's shock, continued a lot of the Bush programs. I don't know if you remember that. And it was thought that this was evidence that the national security presidency in the war context is out of control. And I did not believe that was true, and I wrote this book to go through a whole set of constraints that we don't normally think of. Congress, useless, but lots of institutions inside the executive branch, lawyers, inspectors general, ethics officials, the relationship between the press and civil society and courts. And I think that description of how the world was working then was completely accurate, and it explained Obama and basically the world until Trump. And if I had to say one way of, I'm not suggesting that this happened, but one way to understand what the Trump people have done is they've gone through my book. I'm not saying they actually did. And they made a checklist of every check on the presidency that I listed and how it worked, and they crossed it out. So I would say in that respect, the book has not aged well.
Professor Goldsmith, you've argued for for some time, and when you were in the Bush administration, that presidents have this reservoir of power. It's from Article 2 in the Constitution. There's the explicit enumerated powers that presidents have, let's say commander-in-chief, but the argument since George Washington is that around each of these clauses is something called implied powers. If it says commander-in-chief, well, it's implied that the president should be able to do, wiretapping without a warrant. That there are these kind of, if it says presidents are empowered to receive ambassadors, well, maybe that means that President Obama can strike an agreement with Iran and not follow the usual treaty process. My question to you is, as you look at where we are with Donald Trump, is it time for a serious reexamination and a retrenchment on presidential power? And if so, how would you go about doing that?
Okay, I'm going to give you 3 or 4 answers. And I don't have a great answer to the last question, but I'll tell you what I think. One clear virtue of President Trump is that he has made crystal clear, this was clear, I think, before Trump became president. It is now crystal clear that, yes, the presidency needs deep reform. We don't even have to think about the illegal things. Just think about the lawful things. Think about the idea that the President of the United States has power delegated from Congress in his emergency powers and his trade powers to be able to turn the world upside down by snapping his fingers and carrying out what appears to me to be a crazy tariff policy. That is not just a problem with the presidency, that's a problem with Congress over hundreds of years, really. Giving the president more and more and more power, which presidents were happy to receive and interpreted broadly. And I could go through a whole list of issues where presidents have been given too much power because Congress gave them too much power. So, and then there's the excesses that presidents have committed, not just President Trump. My president, President Bush did, President Obama did, President Biden did, in different ways. And this is a problem that's been growing worse. So, yes, we need fundamental reform. But the problem is, I could come up with a checklist of things that need to be done to the presidency, but everything needs reform. If Congress doesn't work, if Congress doesn't stand for its prerogatives, if Congress is not legislating to keep laws updated, if Congress is not engaged in oversight, all of these things that the framers thought needed to be done, it's going to be very hard to restrain the presidency. So you have to, to reform the presidency. So you have to reform Congress too. Well, that is an insanely difficult problem because that means you have to reform the electoral system. That means you have to reform the committee system. But that's not even the beginning of it. But the problem goes deeper than that because the problem goes to us. Because the American people have grown divided in unprecedented ways. And our electing officials there are all sorts of complicated structural reasons for this, who are electing officials who are more and more extreme, the middle has shrunk to nothing, who aren't talking to one another, who aren't compromising. So, I can come up with a checklist. In fact, the book I wrote, after Trump reforming the presidency, written ambitiously in 2020, had a checklist of 60 or so reforms of the presidency. But the truth is, and I'll tell you why I'm skeptical, and then I'll tell you why I'm hopeful. I'm very skeptical that this is going to be possible unless and until we can somehow reform the populace, reform the people, that we can find ways people who are in different sizes issues to talk to one another, that we can reform Congress and the election system and money in politics, but all of these things are deeply connected. And it's easy to come up with a checklist. I can give you a stack of books that say what need to be done, but how do you implement it when we've got a dysfunctional system? That's the pessimistic story. So here's my optimistic story. And it's not that optimistic, it's hopeful, not optimistic. We've kind of been in this situation before, not quite as bad, but we have been. And, before, I started by talking about the 1970s, and there were massive reforms of the presidency in the 1970s because things had gotten so terribly bad that there was a cross-party consensus that something needed to be done. It was a special moment. It didn't last very long, but hugely important things happened there. And it happened because of the disasters to the country that had happened before. So my hope is that after the experiences we're going through, which I don't think are going to work out well for anyone, that maybe we'll be in a position where we realize more broadly as a country that we need to rethink the way things are running, including the presidency and these other elements, and have real reform. Reform happens in unexpected times and unanticipated ways, and they're hard to predict, but they do happen, and it seemed impossible that the 1970s reforms would happen 5 years before they did. So that, in a nutshell, is my hope.
Professor Goldsmith, let me just quickly follow up. Politicians are guided by incentive structures.
Yes.
I don't think that's a radical insight. And if you look at the behavior of our system, the broader system over the last few months, but also a few years, here you had congressional investigations of Donald Trump. You had a significant effort by Jack Smith to prosecute. That went nowhere. So if you're sitting in Congress and you're thinking, I wonder if it's worth my time, or if you're someone like Jack Smith who put his life on hold for years, and you're wondering, is this worth it? The answer is maybe not, because the system is going to block, perhaps because of the immunity decision. Yep. The other area that concerns me is the decisions or efforts by the Trump administration to freeze government spending that has been approved in law. That is, it was passed by Congress, signed by a president, and Donald Trump is saying we're not going to spend the money. Yep. That's known as impoundment. That's the kind of technical phrase for it. But if the power of the purse for Congress no longer has what the muscle it used to have, what's their incentive to step forward? I mean, I agree with you about the dysfunction in Congress, but gee whiz.
I would put the point differently. So first of all, I have a lot of things to say about the impoundment point. Trump is extreme as always, but this problem started much earlier. Presidents have been increasingly playing around and manipulating and defying Congress on spending money that wasn't appropriated and not spending money that was, and Trump has taken it to new levels. I would put it differently, though. I mean, what incentive does Congress have to do it if this happens? So I completely agree with you. The power of the purse is maybe the most foundational power Congress has. And it was thought to be the reason by the framers that Congress would be so powerful and consequential. No appropriations but by law, the Constitution says. And Congress can cut off funding, and it can shape funding. And what's going on now is such an existential threat to Congress, Republican and Democrat alike. It is, even though I'm very cynical, it is shocking to me that the Republicans in Congress are going along with it, because it is really the last leg Congress has to stand on. So for me, the question is not what incentive does Congress have to do anything if their spending rules aren't going to be complied with. The question is, why the hell isn't Congress doing something about it in this context where it's really an existential threat to whatever power they have left? And I don't have a great answer to that.
Professor Alan Rozenshtein?
I have been reminded that we have a question and answer opportunity. So I believe that we are supposed to get cards, though I am not entirely positive about the process. While that's happening, let me ask one additional question. So we have midterms in 2 years, and obviously it's hard to predict, but given the razor-thin margins in the House at least, and the current approval ratings and just the general vibes, for lack of a better term, it seems quite likely that the Democrats will win. We'll have Speaker Hakeem Jeffries.
In the House.
In the House. Maybe something will happen in the Senate, seems less likely. What are the Democrats supposed to do? And does this possibility for real oversight, is that good, or does that create more risks, or does that create both?
It's both good and it creates more risks. So no, I mean, it will be a form of accountability that is currently lacking. The House of Representatives, under control by Democrats, will be calling up and having hearings and drawing attention to and making the administration account for what it's doing in a way that's not happening now. I don't want to exaggerate how powerful that can be, because it has serious weaknesses, but it's a hell of a lot better than what's going on now, which is nothing. The danger is that presidents have lots of tools to say, pardon my French, screw you. And this president, I'm confident, will take executive prerogative to a new extreme in blowing off any accountability measures that Congress makes. So that could be a kind of small constitutional crisis. And I'm sure both of those dynamics will play out, and I don't know what it will look like.
Great. Thank you very much, and thank you for the questions. We're going to get to as many as possible.
I'll be brief. I'll give brief answers.
We appreciate that. And from a law professor, it's
hard.
It's
hard. I'll watch how brief I can be.
No, we don't want you to be. Let's start with the questions. You can imagine that we as citizens feel more and more powerless. If the courts do not manage to restrain illegal actions taken by the Trump administration, what can we do? What recourse do we have? Is going to the streets the best recourse?
So I can't believe that's the first question. No, because I'm going to be very candid. When I was sitting over there during the introductions, I thought to myself, because I've been hearing a lot, my wife, my children, friends feel powerless. I mean, I feel powerless. And the question is what we can do. And I was afraid I was going to be asked that question. Because, I mean, I don't know I'm sorry, this is not something, and I don't mean to be giving a cop out, it's not something I'm expert on, and I don't know what will work. I guess I'll just say a few things. Something I said to my children yesterday. I guess the first thing I would say is, I'm sorry if this sounds preachy, but I would not give up hope, and I would not catastrophize about the situation in the sense of the news is so bad, it's hopeless, there's nothing we can do. I just would try to resist that mindset, because I still believe the system will find a way to make this president accountable. That's the first thing I would say. I don't know about protests, civil society organization, writing your congressman. I just don't know how effective those things are now. And, what I'm about to say is going to sound corny and maybe not even very productive. But I think what I try to do is, and I think this is something we should all be doing, is, and I'm speaking to people not knowing where you come from, we all need to start getting along better, not demonizing our opponents, not making an enemy out of people who vote the other way, trying to understand them, trying to find common ground. I actually think, it seems so naive, but I actually think that's what needs to happen among the people. And that starts at home in a way, and with neighbors, and So that's one thing I've been trying to spend more time doing. But I'm afraid I don't have I'm glad you clapped, because I think that's very, very important, and that's something we can all do. And that's what I've been trying to do. And it's a very small thing, but it can happen locally, and I think it's really important.
Thank you, Professor Alan Rozenshtein.
So this is a great question, and I'm going to paraphrase it, my apologies. What is the role of the states in all of this? Because we've had this conversation so far exclusively really at the national level, but we, after all, have 50 states. We're a relatively decentralized country. Things like elections are decentralized, which is often, somewhat ironically, a complaint from perhaps people on the left who want the federal government to do more. Today, it may be actually quite a useful thing. What is a state like Minnesota, right? Or perhaps in a different scenario, a state like Texas supposed to do in all of this?
I think Texas is cheering. So, Ellen, you might know the answer have a better answer to this question than I do. So, sort of from the perspective of the framers of the Constitution, they thought divided power was very important as a check on tyranny. Okay? And I just described to you at the federal level how the checks on the executive are extremely weak, maybe weaker than I've ever seen them in my lifetime. But the states are another counterpoint to this. And they're a counterpoint in several ways. The states, first of all, control lots of life. A lot of our lives are governed at the state level, so the states can regulate, organize, pass laws in ways that are resistant to what the federal government's doing. This is why Trump is going after sanctuary cities and trying to crack down on lots of state-based modes of resisting his will. And states are heavily, heavily involved, I don't know if you know this, in the lawsuits against the Trump administration, and are quite consequential and successful. I'm glad you know about this, because this is a hugely important, especially in a world, by the way, in which big law is being scared away and acting pusillanimously. These state-based lawsuits are hugely consequential. They're outstanding lawyers in the state AG and state SG's office. So that is a huge point of pushback or check, and things like that. I mean, it is important to remember that so much of life is still governed by state and local law and state and local communities. And there's only so many bad things the federal government can do, as much power as it has. But I think these lawsuits in particular are very consequential.
We all hear so much about executive orders, but I can't find them in the Constitution. What are they, and can I disobey them?
You can disobey the ones you're not subject to. But if you're subject to it, so this is a great question, and the answer may be surprising. And the office that I used to be in the Office of Legal Counsel in the Justice Department, was the office that reviewed these things. So I got to know them well during the Bush administration. So we see all these executive orders, and we think, oh my God, the president is just making up all this power with all these executive orders. But not a single executive, an executive order cannot add one iota of power to the presidency. Let me say that again. An executive order cannot add one iota of power to the presidency. Every executive order, practically, begins with the phrase where the president says, under my powers under the Constitution and under statutes, i.e. laws of Congress, I hereby do these things. So ultimately, an executive order's legality rests on these other powers, the Constitution and statutes. And what they are ways of presidents interpreting these authorities to implement various policies. Now, And a lot of what this litigation is that's going on right now throughout the country is, are these executive orders lawful, i.e., are they consistent with those constitutional and statutory bases that the president invoked? So all an executive order really is a command from the president to say, I interpret my powers from the Constitution and statutes to be X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to take those powers and do something about it, and I'm putting that in a document I call an executive order. But really, an executive order cannot add to the president's power beyond the laws that stand behind them.
Professor Alan Rozenshtein.
How is the press doing this time around? And of course, we have many sides to the press, so there's that element as well, in holding the executive to account.
Not an expert on this, so take what I say with a grain of salt. I'm definitely not an expert on this. You know, the New York Times and similar publications are doing a great job of telling us what's happening with the executive, just to use an example, and not just the New York Times, obviously, with the executive branch, what's going on inside the executive branch, in making all the policies accessible. I think it's accessible. I think it's been doing a remarkable job, and other newspapers have as well, of explaining what's going on and giving inside scoops and perspectives and the like. That's what it's supposed to be doing. But the press by itself has zero power. All the press can do is provide information. And the question is, what do the people do with that information, and what does the Congress do with that information? So, and the answer to that question so far is not much. So that's the first point. Second point is, and again, I'm not expert on this, but obviously the media ecosystem is massively riven, decentralized. And people get their news and information from so many different sources now. And we, too many of us, and I'm not speaking about anyone in particular because I don't know any of you, but too many of us live in bubbled news ecosystems. And because there are so many, and because especially on social media, which tends to exaggerate the extremes and the extreme claims, the press is not doing as well as it once did, because in the aggregate, it's not providing accurate, objective information on which the people can act and understand, and on which Congress can act. And let me just say, I spend a lot of time trying to avoid this. It's hard. I mean, I love the New York Times, but I often read the New York Times, and the New York Times, sorry if I'm offending anyone, as much as I love it, it has become a much more opinionated newspaper in the news columns. This is just something that's happened in the last 10 years under Trump. So I always start with the Times, but I read lots of different news sources, lots of different perspectives. And frankly, it's exhausting, but I think you have to do that to really get a sense of what's going on now. But the ultimate problem, the two problems are the bubbled news worlds, and that even when there's accurate reporting about what's going on, if the people in Congress don't act, things can be brought to light that bring lawsuits, but if they don't act, then the press is just out there providing information.
Thank you, Professor Goldsmith. We've heard a lot tonight about the dangers and the risks of the imperial presidency. Question: has the rise of the imperial presidency had any benefit for the American people?
That's an excellent question, which I've never thought of. So give me 10 seconds to think about it. I would say that the rise of the imperial presidency is by definition a powerful presidency that's not adequately accountable to law and to the people. So I would say the imperial presidency brings no benefits or few benefits. I do believe, and this is unfashionable, and this is what makes reform hard, and this is another view of Arthur Schlesinger Jr., who's kind of one of my intellectual heroes and whom I've learned so much from. I do believe that a powerful presidency is necessary. I think a powerful presidency is necessary to make the system work. Throughout American history, it's been presidential leadership, aggressive presidential leadership, that has brought the country from a bad place to a better place. Think of Lincoln, think of Roosevelt, think of Washington, think of Jefferson, think of many other presidents. And the system is so complicated and is so prone to inertia that a powerful president is absolutely necessary to make our separation of powers work. And the tricky part is making it a powerful presidency under law. So I would say I don't have much brief for the unaccountable imperial presidency. I do have a brief for a powerful presidency. And the question, and I'm literally almost paraphrasing Schlesinger on the last page of the imperial presidency, is that what we need is a powerful presidency who's accountable under law and other institutions. That's what the Constitution envisioned, that's what the Constitution needs, and that's what we need to recover.
Professor Alan Rozenshtein.
So there's a very interesting question here about the pardon power, and I'm going to try to actually hook that into this question about the imperial presidency. Is the pardon power, and especially with reference to the way that this president, especially this term, has used the pardon power, is that something that we can afford anymore? And the reason I ask it in this way is because the pardon power obviously has some potential profound upsides. That's why it exists.
Yep.
Is this the sort of thing, and are there other parts of, other potentially beneficial parts of Article 2 that we can't have nice things?
I would say this is a view I've come to recently. The pardon power is really the Achilles heel of the Constitution. It is, I cannot exaggerate this point enough. And we've seen it. We saw it but it didn't start with Trump. It kind of got going with Clinton and first President Bush and Trump's abuses, President Biden's abuses, in my judgment, and now President Trump again. And the bottom line is the pardon power gives the president an absolute power to relieve someone from the consequences of a federal crime. And this was always kept under control, like everything else, by norms, by shame, by political constraint, by those things. And like everything else, those constraints are gone. And we now understand, as President Biden did, that preemptive pardons are okay. And he, you might think, did that for virtuous reasons, but they won't always be used virtuously. And basically, I worry much more about the pardon power than the presidential immunity power, because a president can promote criminal activity and then just relieve it. A president could tomorrow pardon every single person in this country who's committed a federal crime. Every single one. It is an absolute power of massive consequence that is now, I think, cannot be trusted by the presidency. Cannot be placed in a trustworthy way in the president's hands. And so, no, I don't think we can afford the pardon power anymore. And, the pardon power has virtuous uses. It was an important font of mercy and an important font of reconciliation, and it serves very useful roles, and it's played an important part in American history, but it needs to be checked and it needs to be rethought.
Stay seated. I got a few announcements before we wrap up here. Today's program was made possible by Penny and Bill George and the George Family Foundation, and we are grateful for their support. The Center for the Study of Politics and Governance, which I direct and work with my colleagues who are here tonight, has a number of terrific events coming up. We encourage you and invite you to come and participate, and which you can follow online. Let me just mention a few of them. On Tuesday, April 22nd, we've got the latest in our Conservative Voices series. We have Stephen Moore, who's an economist at the Heritage Foundation, coming to talk about President Trump's policies to reduce taxes and regulations. These are vibrant conversations. This is not a one-sided sort of thing. Vin Weber is my partner in that series, and I've really enjoyed it. This particular event is made possible by the Minnesota Business Partnership. On May 2nd, New York Times columnist Pamela Paul will be here to discuss speech on campus. Those of you who read Pamela Paul in the New York Times will know that she has an acerbic, witty, and sometimes funny presentation. And please come and join us for that. And then on June 5th, Joe Biden's national security advisor and Minnesota native, Jake Sullivan, will be with us to reflect on the Biden administration policies and his thoughts on the future of America on the world stage. And this event is made possible by a generous contribution from Humphrey School alumnus Kiyoshi Nagasaka. If you're interested in this, you can go online under CSPG and find all sorts of information on it. Plus, we have a table out front which has information on that. And then, I can't thank enough our special guest, Jack Goldsmith. What a real treat to have you here.
Thank you.
And I also want to thank my collaborator, Alan Rozenshtein. The great thing about Alan is we get together to plan, and we mostly have fun. So it's great. Thank you very much, Alan. It's great to have you. Thanks to all of you for coming out tonight.